want to describe a cultural triangle that has been a useful tool for us. And let me first say that we think of this as a useful oversimplification. So, what I mean by that is that this is too simple. It's beyond, it doesn't capture the nuance, the many different ways in which we engage in the world. And yet, we have found it to be a very useful tool to help us think about our lives together and ways in which we are different from each other in good ways. So this idea says that we can lay out aspects of our cultures on a triangle. And each point in the triangle represents an inclination, a tendency for a way to behave. And so I'm going to start at the top point here and say for some cultures or some aspects of cultures, we can be very emotional. That there's a lot of energy that people have in this category. They tend to be louder, and it tends to be more chaotic, less planned, less where it's an anticipation of where it's going to go, and we behave in that. This other corner is groups of people or individuals who tend to be much quieter. They tend to be much slower to speak. And they tend to spend a lot of time watching others. In terms of care, of paying attention to who is being included and left out, and how is everyone experiencing this. The third point in the triangle, this is people or cultures that tend to be very logical. They tend to focus on productivity, so they're very productive. They get their work done orderly and on time. They tend to be less emotional. And they often are very disciplined. They do the one thing that needs to be done, and then they move on to do another thing. And so we found this to be useful then to give these some names. And so this first group we think of as being expressive. So these are people or groups where there's a lot of expression, a lot of communicating what it is that I'm feeling and how I'm experiencing the world right now. And there tends to be a lot of passion. You tend to know what expressive people think. In this corner down here, we refer to these as reflective people. They spend a lot more time thinking than speaking. They reflect on others, they reflect on their own experience, and they process things very often internally. And it can often be much more challenging to know what a reflective person thinks because it's not as natural or common for them to be quick to tell the details of how they're experiencing the world. In the third corner, we have people that we refer to as analytical people. And so these are people who like to analyze, who are very good at looking at the facts and finding out what's logical and figuring out an ideal path in things. Now, as I said, this is a useful oversimplification. These aren't just cultures, but we do see how there's a lot of variation among these things among cultures. We also see within families in a culture, as well as individual personality. So somebody can be in a culture that is largely expressive, but be a rather reflective person, or the reverse. And we also recognize that essentially nobody lives in these corners, that some of us are rather analytical people who talk a lot about our analysis. And some of us are rather analytical people, but maybe we don't speak as much. We're more reflective, whereas some of us are very reflective. We have an ability to talk about our experience, but the tendency is to be watching, slower to speak, certainly able to communicate what we're thinking and not opposed to it, but being more reflective. And so we find ourselves, each person, and perhaps in different ways, at different places on this cultural triangle. And so this has been an important thing for us then to say, how do we behave together if this is true? And you can see where, as a simple example, there can be some challenge in an expressive person and a reflective person loving each other, because their ways of engaging might be very different. And so it's important for us to better understand ourselves and each other and then know how to love each other in this.